So by show of hands, how many of you all have felt so-called imposter syndrome? It's a safe space. You can raise your hand in this space. If you've ever experienced the moment of walking into a room and that voice comes up and says to you, they're going to figure out I don't belong here. The reality is most of us have experienced it, particularly women, folks from marginalized populations. But if so many of us smart, competent, capable people have experienced this, we've got to stop and ask ourselves, are we all imposters? Or is there something else going on? Because what I've noticed is that that feeling doesn't show up when you're standing still. It shows up when you're stretching, when you're growing, when you're standing at the edge of something big, something new. But we've been programmed to read this feeling as a warning, as a signal that we're not good enough, that we're not ready, that we don't belong. But what if we've been misreading that signal all along? I want you to think about the first time you learned to drive. Not after you'd been behind the wheel for a while, but when you first got behind the wheel of a car, hands trembling as you grip the steering wheel. Checking the mirror every 2 or 3 seconds, heart racing as you approach the stop sign. Sounds amplified, horns beeping outside the car, your parents yelling inside the car. No one said, that feeling, that's driving imposter syndrome. They didn't say, maybe you should stop driving until you feel a little more confident behind the wheel. No, there was something that we all understood instinctively. That discomfort of growth didn't mean you didn't belong behind the wheel. It meant that you were growing, that you were learning. We didn't pathologize it, we didn't diagnose it. We expected nerves, right? We expected uncertainty. We expected a little bit of a lack of confidence. And we trusted that confidence would come because you kept driving, not before. But somehow when it comes to our leadership, our careers, our visibility, we seem to forget that. Far too many of us have an assumption that that feeling of imposter syndrome means that you don't belong, that you're not ready, that you're not capable. And so when that feeling comes up, we read it as a signal to stop. But that assumption that imposter syndrome means you don't belong, it falls apart under the tiniest bit of scrutiny. Because it doesn't show up when you're stagnant. It shows up when you're leveling up. It shows up when you're growing. It shows up when the stakes are higher. It shows up when you're more visible than ever before. It shows up when you're expanding. As an executive leadership coach, many of my clients, lawyers, healthcare executives, public health practitioners, they come to me and say, Montrece, can you help me overcome imposter syndrome? What I've learned from that work is that, for the most part, that feeling is not a flaw to be fixed. It's a misread signal. It's your nervous system reacting to unfamiliar growth before your confidence has had a chance to catch up. Early in my career, I remember being invited to be on a national stage with public health leaders whose names I'd only ever seen in lights or in journal articles. I stayed up all night the night before, nervous, reading and rereading my bio, reading and rereading my notes, trying to convince myself that I'd earned my spot on that stage, that I belonged there. Standing behind the podium, nervous as all get out, hands shaking so bad that I had to lock them behind my back in order to make it through. And then that voice comes up. They're gonna figure out you don't belong here. And I look out in the audience, second row, a young Black woman, pen in hand, nodding at every word that I said. And she was looking at me like I looked at women leaders in public health who looked like they had it all figured out. And something shifted in me. I was there. I wasn't there despite the fear. I was there with it. That fear that I felt, it wasn't evidence that I was an imposter. It was evidence that I was growing. It was evidence that I was finding my sense of belonging while becoming. What I've learned is that feeling, when we label it a syndrome, when we diagnose it, when we pathologize it, we take a normal human reaction and we make it a personal indictment. We tell people to overcome it, push it down, silence it, instead of asking what it's actually signaling. What is it actually signaling? And the thing we rarely say out loud is that real imposters, they don't question if they belong. But those of us who care do. Those of us who want to do right by the responsibility, we do. And it becomes important for us to shift our mindset around this so-called imposter syndrome. To move from seeing it as a sign of inadequacy to seeing it as a sign of expansion, as a sign of growth. Because the reality is, imposter syndrome doesn't mean that you don't belong. It might mean that you're exactly where you belong to become exactly who you're meant to be. Thank you.